This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout.
This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swantowski. I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. So for tonight's episode, we'd like to talk about the differences between trout species. How are the habits of brown trout different than rainbow trout? Where do brook trout tend to hold and feed versus a brown trout? What about cutthroat? Do they have different tendencies or habits than their counterparts? I think we might even branch out a bit into bull trout and steelhead here too. But for the most part, the majority of our conversation will be centered on the most prevalent trout across this country and across the world, really. Because as we've consistently acknowledged over the 3.5 years of these podcast discussions, fishing is hard to talk about. It's tough to generalize and say, this is what trout do. Because there are so many variables and really so many variations of trout in our rivers. Brown trout are better night feeders. Rainbow trout don't seem to mind the sun so much. Brookies can be spooky, but not all that picky. Sometimes. Anyway, the Troutbitten guys are here with me tonight, following along with our theme for this season to have a casual conversation about what we see on the water. How do these trout types differ? So I'll introduce the guys as we answer a listener question. Dr. Trevor Smith, will you start us off? Read this one.
Sure will. This one comes in from Dave Ramirez through email. Dom, here's a question for the podcast. Assuming gin clear water, low flows, and spooky fish, also no rise forms and no visible fish, prospecting, how close do you get and what are your preferred tactics? Thanks, Dave.
What do you think, guys?
Here's
Matt Grobe. He's got an idea. He's coming.
Yeah, I'm coming at you. I'm coming at you slow in gin clear water. But if conditions are like that, I often try to find riffly water, right? A little bit of movement.
Good point.
Even if it's low. In most rivers, right, you can find that. Not all, like some spring creeks are gin clear and glassy for the some spring creeks, not all, right? The spring creeks you guys have aren't like that, but there are some in South Central PA that are very, gin clear, low, spooky, glassy, and there's some out here and close to my home in Bozeman that are very much like that. So let's put those ones aside. If I'm in a normal freestone river and I encounter that stuff, I'm trying to find the oxygenated, moving water to help conceal, myself. And I feel like that type of water will allow the trout to feed a little more aggressively, and they become less spooky in that type of water.
I hadn't thought about that. You're going to throw away a lot of water, right? I mean, whatever. You're going to pass up a lot of stuff. Fish what you can effectively fish. Good point.
Ought to do the old knee trick. Just get down on the knees.
Here's Josh Darling. That's his signature. It's his
crawl in
signature
there.
move, Josh.
There are a lot of pictures of me doing that. You got to crawl in there, tilt the rod a little bit, and stay nice and low.
Get your angles low. Yeah. I also think it's clear most of the predation on trout happens from above, and so they don't really want to be in that gin clear water sitting still either, especially as they get a little bit older and wiser. So I think, focusing on undercut banks or riffled water, or you're kind of, the one advantage or the one thing working in your favor is that the trout are going to be limiting their own visual cues just by seeking out some of that protection too. So like Grobe said, riffled water is awesome. But I mean, we definitely have situations around here, fall conditions where it's pretty low and clear. And gosh, obviously we would approach most of those fish from a downstream to make sure that the
wading upstream.
Right, wading upstream.
Yeah, right on.
So that the wake's kind of drifting behind us, moving slow. I don't know. It can take, it's hard to throw a number out there because I feel like it just depends on even like just so many different situations. But I'm trying to reach out as far as I can in those situations, like 20 feet, 30 feet, and trying to float the sighter if I could start with that, or do some tactic that allows me. Dry dropper is great, right? If you can approach from a diagonal so you're not lining all the fish, but something that allows you to reach out there.
Josh, you got another idea?
He asked for distance, and I don't think that the distance doesn't make any difference if you can't get a good drift. And so you got to know yourself.
Oh, that's a good point.
And
too.
you got to know what's the furthest range that I can get a pure drift at. And that's your distance. And you don't go closer. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll see if it's that clear and the trout are spooky, you're going to see basically how close you can get before you're spooking fish. You got to be extra patient, like you guys were saying, extra stealthy. For me, I'm probably not going to nymph unless I really have to. Even though he said nothing's rising, I'm probably going to throw dry flies. If it's really low water, then it's not too big of an ask, probably, for asking fish to come up 12 inches, 14 inches, whatever, 20 inches. Even in riffly water, if I can get them to eat dry flies, then obviously I can stay further back. And then my next move would be go light dry dropper, so an unweighted nymph beyond the dry fly. And if I had to, then I'd go, kind of standard dry dropper. Deli, you got nothing. There he is. There he is. There's Bill Dell.
I guess you guys are talking all these tactics, but none of you are talking about what leader or what butt section you're using. So, if it's flat and gin clear, I'm probably going to fish fly line. If if it is a river that still has big buckets and big boulders, but it is lower, I might nymph fish with a mono butt section, or I might fish fly line. It just depends what the situation dictates.
When I talk about dry flies, I'm talking about fishing fly line and a Harvey leader. But yeah, I'm with you. If I need that distance, that's what fly line's good for. But if, like Matt said, if you can find riffly water, even though it's low and clear, man, you can get really close. I mean, 15 feet. If you're coming in from behind them, and if it's riffled, a medium paced riffle with some chop on the water, and as long as you're not pushing waves into them, like there's enough cover, even in sun. There's enough cover. And that's probably where they are. If they're wanting to feed and the water's like that, at that low and clear, they're going to go to those places. And that's where the food factory is anyway. And that's where they're going to go for some protection against those overhead predators, like you said, Trevor. So should we do a full podcast on low clear water or make this or go back to what we were going to do here?
Didn't you do a podcast on low clear water fishing?
We have. We've talked about summer conditions and whatnot. A lot of great options. I think we covered a lot of things that we would. I know what you guys would do, and I'd kind of do the same things. All right, so one more question here, because I get this a lot. This is from Mark Nebitz from Utah, and he asks, Dom, you and the podcast crew talk a lot about brown trout. I also follow your website, and nearly every fish picture is a brown trout. So 2 questions. First, why so much love for browns only? And second, do you believe the tactics you use on brown trout in your area will work on other species as well? If not, what changes would you make? Thanks, Dom, from Mark. And I say thanks, Mark, because that does lead us right into our discussion. So let's use Mark's question here. And he opens a lot of doors in that question. I'm pretty sure we'll answer his questions along the way. Where do you guys want to start?
A big part of it is the fact that we primarily, if we're looking for wild trout, that's what we have here. We're in Pennsylvania and we don't have cutthroat trout. We've got brook trout and we've got brown trout if we're looking for wild opportunities. Very rarely do we have wild rainbow opportunities. So that is maybe the primary reason why that shows up by far the most.
I'll say right off the bat too, like we've all fished for wild rainbows. We've all fished for cutthroat. I think we all have. And that's definitely why. We also, I think we're going to find out in this discussion, I think we all kind of have the greatest admiration for the wild brown trout too, for maybe a number of reasons. And maybe I'm off base. Look at Deli shaking his head. Tell us why.
My favorite trout is a brook trout.
Okay.
Well, I guess it's not even a trout, it's a char.
There you go. Now he's going to get picky about it.
He's been learning things.
Go start charbitting. Get the hell out of here.
All right. Peace out.
Char. I don't believe, Deli. I don't believe you that you have the greatest admiration for the native brook trout.
I do. They were here first. They're the native species.
So, I mean, I know you chase them some, and you've chased them a lot recently, but do you chase them the most?
If the conditions are right, yeah, I would rather chase brook trout than brown trout.
Yeah. Is it where the brook trout lead you to? Is it the places or the fish themselves?
Both. I guess I just like brook trout. Not always, but a lot of times they're in remote mountain streams that you've got to hike and cover miles, and they're not as technical in most places. They'll be technical in some places that'll kind of surprise me.
Right. Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. It's just something where I don't see as many anglers, it takes a different kind of person to chase your biggest fish of the day is going to be 5 to 6 inches.
Sure.
I'm going to piggyback on Deli because I'm going to agree with him, just on a different species with the cutthroat. So I think I was at a time, I was in agreement with Dom with the brown trout without a question. I think at one point that's what I chased, right? Primarily. And then once I discovered where this goes into what you said, Dom, where the cutthroat led me, right, is the environment that is the most pristine, untouched, and, it's not everywhere, right? It's such a small percentage of the streams we have in America that harbor cutties that once after I'd say 5 or 6 years of chasing fish out here, I've grown to really admire that fish and where it lives for the environment that it's in and the lack of, there's not a ton of opportunity to chase that fish in a good, in a prime fishery. There's just not a ton of them. And so I feel like it's gotten to the point where now I'm 43 and I switched. It took me a long time, right? But the evolution of my career led me to and I love all fish. Don't get me wrong, but there's a soft spot for chasing cutties. So nice. I get you, Deli. I get where you're coming from.
I think I respect the resilience of the brown trout and its ability to adapt to a wider set of circumstances here. Yeah. And just that, honestly, even from an angling opportunity, I love that it offers a lot of different water types that you can seek it out in our state. And it's just hard. Like I would love for the brook trout to be more
prevalent
in a lot of in a lot of our bigger waterways. But the difficulty with the coexistence with browns and their aggressiveness, and I just think it's kind of naturally led towards, and then certainly some mild warming trends in the water have led towards receding brook trout ranges to the northern states, certainly much more than here. But yeah, I'm certainly still in a brown trout heavy phase.
So Deli and Matt, I guess my question to you, it sounds to me like you're talking more about the fishing than the fish. If you could find brown trout that same experience and you were chasing brown trout, would you then be more enamored with the browns than the cutties?
I wouldn't, just because and this is nothing against brown trout. You can find brown trout everywhere. They're all over the world. They're all over the states. Cutthroat isn't. So to me, that's the intrigue. It's finding these native fish in these secluded waters. And to me, that matters because it's like, wow, this is what it was supposed like 100 years ago, right? It still hasn't changed in that water. And I've chased brook trout. I didn't live far from where Deli lived, and I used to like chasing that native. There was something about that native fish in its home water, and just the uniqueness to it. I think it's just this isn't about the fish fighting. It's like the fact that it's unique in that situation for me.
Interesting. I've never cared that much about wild versus native debate. I'm like, well, I'm going to fish what's in there. And I love fishing for brook trout, but like I say, for me, it's about the fishing. And when I can find mountain streams north of here, and there are a lot of them, that have, great wild trout populations, I'm just as happy fishing for those as I am our native brook trout. Yeah, I guess I'm a little different that way. I don't really care about native trout. Isn't that terrible to say? It's not that terrible. I don't want to protect them and everything. Yeah. It's just I'm not enamored with that. I'm like, it's a fish, and I'm like Trevor. I like the way you said it. Like you have a lot of respect for them. How do you put it, Trevor?
I mean, I just think they've shown themselves to be a really resilient fish
Resilience.
in an ever-changing climate. And I think, you know, I think anybody that wants to get, and I'm not saying that either you, Grover or Deli, are wrong for
Go ahead,
liking
Trevor.
the uniqueness,
Throw us
right?
under the bus.
Well, I just think we're not native to America. So, I mean,
Right.
so why would we expect our trout to be?
Yeah.
And, you know, I think the
Josh likes that.
So,
Leave
I
it
mean,
there.
now I myself have a fair amount of indigenous blood, but I'm not sure about you jokers.
He's more native than we
Yeah.
are.
I am more of a brown trout. Yeah, I don't know. I also think like if you try to, you just like in Pennsylvania, and this is where the majority of our fishing happens. I can't utilize all the tactics on brook trout because I just don't find them in the type of water that I could fish for them using all the tactics that I want to fish with.
Yeah,
you
go
know?
throw some articulated streamers at some brook trout.
Right.
See what happens. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Bill probably does it.
Yeah, Billy. He's probably snagging them out of there and then admiring their native beauty.
You guys don't fish an egg with treble hooks on them?
There it is. This is interesting. This is why I like these casual conversations. No layout, no outline, no real plan.
Yeah.
We're talking really about what our favorite is, and that's good. Now I learned something about your favorites that I didn't think I would hear. Let's talk about the differences, though. Whether it's our favorite or not, what are the differences? You know, what does a brook trout do differently than a brown? What does a cutty do? Like Matt, you're gonna have more experience with the cutties than we do. What do they do different? What do brook trout do differently? What are their habits? What are their tendencies? Since 2006, Yeti has been building products for anglers who fish hard and share an addiction for the woods and the water. Yeti changed the industry with their legendary coolers by featuring rugged but simple designs built to last for generations and stand up to whatever Mother Nature might bring. Yeti now takes that same functional and elegant design to everything in their lineup, from soft coolers to drinkware, bags, and more. The new Yeti Go Box gear cases have become my daily storage solution for a life on the water. Offered in 3 sizes, the Go Boxes are rugged and waterproof at home on a boat or in the back of a pickup. All Yeti Go Boxes offer smart storage solutions with removable cargo trays and dividers, and the Pack Attic is a set of zippered pockets conveniently housed in the interior lid of the 30 and 60 sizes. Lockable, light, and nearly indestructible. I use the 15 size Go Box for camera gear and the 30 size for organizing my reels, fly boxes, leaders, tippet, and everything else that keeps me fishing. The Yeti Loadout Go Boxes are the perfect angler's companion. For over a decade, Smith Creek has designed and built outstanding gear for the serious angler. Smith Creek's Rod Rack is the perfect solution to store up to 7 pre-rigged fly rods safely inside your vehicle. Each kit comes with 2 heavy-duty suction cups and 3 mounting methods. If your vehicle has bolt holes in the rear headliner, Smith Creek now offers free M6 eye bolts with your proof of purchase. The Smith Creek Rod Rack has been my choice for rod storage for the last 5 years because I prefer to keep my rods in the vehicle, rigged up and ready to go, without the need for a rod vault on the top of the vehicle. All Smith Creek gear is backed by outstanding customer service, no matter where or when you bought it. To stay up to date on their latest specials, follow them on Instagram at Smith Creek NZ. Quality you can depend on from a brand you can trust. Smith Creek.
I think the brook trout tend to stay in the slack water a lot more than brown trout. There may be this nice big deep plunge pool, but a lot of times they're right on the edge in the kind of the calm, kind of dead spot is usually where I find them. So if I have a stream that has both brookies and browns, I tend to, not always, but often I'll catch them in different water types. And so maybe it's the browns are more aggressive, but even in streams that don't have browns in, those brookies seem to really like that really soft water.
Good.
Like you're looking for a speed, and it can be, 6 inches deep or it can be 2 feet deep, but they seem to like that calmer stuff. Where browns they'll tuck under stuff more. They'll lay in the deep kind of heavier runs, it seems like at times.
I feel like browns really want that structure
Mm-hmm.
more than the others.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to some of the differences in how they feed, right? Like a brown is primarily an ambush predator.
Well, the bigger
so I think,
ones can
right.
be.
Yeah, for
They're
sure.
still drift feeders. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You're right. I think
They
it's probably,
there'll be a more ambush predator than like a rainbow trout or a brook trout. Even when those get to be mature, when the rainbow
Mhm.
trout is a big one, it's still not going to chase down a streamer as often as,
Mhm.
like you say, the ambush predator of kind of that apex brown.
Sure.
We're going to generalize all night here in our discussion
Sure.
too. I
Sure.
don't
Yeah.
want people out there going, nope, that's not true.
yeah.
I think it's fair to say that generally.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Grobe, what's different about the cutthroat in terms of because I don't think any of us have the extensive experience you
No.
do.
So what Deli described with the brook trout is very, very similar to at least where you tend to run into the cutties, right? Soft seams. I mean, they love lazy lies is where you're going to find a cutthroat. And often they're the one species of fish that I do better with dry flies than I do nymphs. Okay. And let me go into this a little bit.
Yeah.
For people that don't understand cutthroat fishing. When you take, and this is actually can be considered a con. You guys get to fish for brown trout year round out there, right? And for when you take the cutthroat range, whether it's Colorado, it's the Rocky Mountain West, right, is where the majority of the cutthroat live. They're not living in these valleys. Not many of them are living in the Valley of Bozeman or whatnot, right? So you got to penetrate into the mountains for the most part. There's always exceptions, right? But they're tribs often, or you have, unique situations. The Yellowstone River, it's not a trib, it's a big river. But where those cutthroat really flourish is way up in Yellowstone National Park and slightly below it. So what I'm getting at, these rivers and tribs that harbor these cutthroats are locked up and or unfishable for the vast majority of the season because they're iced up. You can't get to them. Yellowstone's closed. And then you have runoff, right? And then you have this small window where you can target cutthroat, right? Which is, from my experience, outside of some really, the Snake River in Jackson's an exception, right? It's a tailwater. It's got a lot of Snake River cuts, and you can fish for those almost year round. But most of the tribs get iced up because they're freestoners. They're really cold, and there's 9 feet of snow on the banks, and you literally can't get to them, right? So it's a small window, and to me that's what makes the cutthroat trout unique, and the main feeding that happens with them coincides with the best dry fly fishing. And that's my theory as to why the cutties are just this reliable dry fly eater, right? That's like what and I know they eat nymphs, but like they're just attuned to gobbling surface flies more so than nymphs. I've always done better on dry flies for the most part, targeting those fish.
It's the time of year then, you're saying, just because it's when they're available.
Yeah, it's when it's available.
To. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And it's just a small, it's a small time window to target them. And I think that's another reason why it's unique to chase them. When you start chasing them, right now, I'm like, it's December. There's not a ton of places I can go find cutties, right?
Because if they're iced in, if you want to call it that, for so long, if their metabolism is way down because the water temperature's 30 degrees, then when it's prime feeding time, then I get the feed bag on. And for how many months is that? Really?
It's, I would say late, like 4th week in June.
Yeah, right.
On.
Like
and there's a small window in April, but they're lazy, right? They're not like, it's like that prime time where that water temperature window hits 50 to 64. You look at that in a 12-month window, and it's like two and a half months.
So
maybe.
they should be pretty eager to eat those dry flies when you throw them at them.
For sure, right?
Yeah,
and
right
that's
on.
what makes it kind of fun is when to target them. But that to me is the unique part, and the water they lie in, and the fact that you can get away with chasing them specifically with the dry fly. And look, I'm sure it's not too far off of the brook trout in its native region and
Right.
Delhi, you can communicate to that, but you guys just get more opportunity, I think, to chase them
Yeah.
than we do out here for our native fish.
It does make me wonder if you could take those same cutties and put them in, I don't know,
Mhm.
one of our limestoners that where our brown trout eat 365 days a year. What would their habits be? Give them
Yeah.
a couple years in there. You know what
Sure.
I mean?
Yeah.
Would their habits even out? Would they be so eager? Would they be, would they really be easier to catch than the browns? I think they still would be. I think their genetics are still going to be similar. Well,
It
at least the genetics are still
well-
going to be the same. I think their habits would still be somewhat the same. Deli, you got something?
Yeah, I guess it depends if you're putting stocky ones in there. Or you're like truly, bringing, wild fish out.
Right.
I know
that's
they-
a point. Let me interrupt you real quick. We should have said that from the beginning. Like, we're talking about wild fish. Last week we talked about why do some rivers hold big trout, and we right away said we're talking about wild trout.
Sure.
Because you can put an artificial situation, you can put big trout, stock
Yep.
big trout. There you go. Same thing here. I should have said. We should have brought up from the beginning. We're really talking about wild trout.
Sure. And
Everything
interesting
changes when you throw stockies in there.
before Delhi goes, but that's an interesting point, Dom, because if they were put in that situation, it would be different because it's like, what if you put the browns in their situation where the browns were only fished for 2.5 months a year?
Yeah.
Would they be more gullible to eat a dry fly, right?
I think they would. And then they'd still, if compared with the cutties in the same situation, I think the brown would still be, let's say, more discriminating because it's in their nature. I
Sure.
believe anyway.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's an interesting point. Go ahead. Deli.
I don't think the brown would feed on top as much because
Cool. Yeah.
I don't know. I fished some brown trout streams that don't
Yeah.
see much angler pressure,
Right.
and I fished dry dropper, and a lot of times they're not taking that dry, or if I'm just fishing a dry, a lot of times they won't come up and make that commitment, and it could be the
know.
bug life. Like, that's another factor. Maybe the bug life. Matt, I guess is
Well,
there like are those streams fertile and have a lot of bugs in them that they're used to seeing?
I think
stuff
they
on
have.
the surface.
Look, for the 2.5 months, right? What do they
Right.
have? They have some stone flies, and they have a smorgasbord of caddis, and then hoppers, right? And so that's like all you need is a lot of times you end up covering those streams with a chubby, right, or something simple, and they're not picky. I mean, I would say some are, right. Some of these places can be, the cutties can be picky, but overall, to your point, Bill, they just tend to look up. I don't know. It's just in their nature to want to eat a dry fly. I think that's why people like to chase them, right? I mean, there's that's part of it, is because you can chase them with the dry fly. You don't have to get into nymphs as much when it comes to the cutthroat.
Bill, what you said about a brown not being as willing to come up in general, I mean, I think we hear that a good bit. I guided a guy from the eastern part of our state with a big river, right? And, there's wild rainbows in there, in that system, and there's wild browns. And he was talking, it's kind of what made me think about doing this topic. He was talking a lot about the difference in those trout. And he loves, everybody out there in that system loves fishing dry flies. But he willingly admits that, like, the rainbows are easier to catch. They're more eager to come up to the surface. And everybody, though, loves that challenge of trying to get those brown trout, those, let's say, discriminating, those picky brown trout, especially during a hatch, emergence, spinner fall, whichever. Everybody loves trying to figure out exactly what they're eating, getting their presentations just perfect, because that brown trout is perhaps a bigger challenge to come up top.
Oh yeah. I don't think there's any argument for people that have fished that the brown is the pickier of the 4 species.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that they're the more finicky.
Mhm.
I always think about days in Central PA where you had a 10-year sample chasing the same hatch, and the conditions, you usually hit a home run like once every 6 years, right? Where the conditions would all
Oh, yeah.
come together, whether it was level and bug life and for whatever reason. I'm like, why are these fish so damn moody, right? Like, but it's just the way they are. They're not pushovers. The brown trout, and I think they, there's an argument to be made that they probably make you a better angler than if you're chasing other species on a regular basis.
Yeah, especially when they're well fed and they're in consistent water temps. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what about Matt? You probably fish for wild rainbows the most out of all of us.
Sloop does. Let's be honest. But
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
I love it.
Sorry. Hey, Sloop. I know Sloop's been listening a lot, so that's why I said that.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Sloop loves the rainbows.
Yeah.
Well, why does he love the rainbows?
So
Go ahead, throw them on the bus.
yeah, they're definitely more gullible. I think from my experience out here, they're more susceptible and willing to eat flashier nymphs, right? The rainbow
they move?
warriors.
Do you think they
What's-
move further to eat a fly? Move further out of their lane? Or?
Yeah, Dom, because I think often, but it coincides with the water they typically reside in, which is often the fast water.
Yeah.
They like that oxygenated, quick water, and so they eat quicker. And look, the rainbows out here, they really fight well, right? There's
A better
a
fighter.
hell of a fight
Yeah.
that happens when you hook into those.
That's a good point.
But there's no question that they're more gullible, and there is an argument to be made that oftentimes there's more of them out here, right? So it naturally seems like you catch more of them, but it's just they're the more dominant species at times. Our brown trout have gone through somewhat of a struggle throughout the area where the populations are on a downswing for whatever, multiple reasons. And so when the rainbows are more prevalent, to me, when they're in the type of water, the fast, riffly pocket water, and that's sometimes it seems like that's all you're catching, is the brown trout. And we've talked about where do these species like to reside. You can it's unique out here, right? I have a unique opportunity because you get cutthroats, browns, rainbows in the river system.
All
right?
wild.
And I could sit there, all of them, and you could be like, all right, here's that log jam. I can almost guarantee you I'm going to hook a brown trout next to that deadfall. And then you go into the mid-river, fast run. Oh, probably going to get the rainbow,
Yeah.
in here. And then the soft seams on the edge. If I'm going to catch a cutty, I could all call it out and be like, hey, you're probably going to catch a cutty in there. And what we're talking about now, when you see it out here at live, when they're all wild, it's pretty cool because they definitely have those tendencies to reside in these specific water types that we're talking about.
I guess the rainbow trout are sitting at the top of the run, and so that water moves faster, and I guess they probably expend more energy to sit there, and so they probably have to eat more to maintain the ability to stay in that lane that's faster.
That's a good point. Even though there's a strike zone, there's a slower cushion on the bottom. That cushion's still going slower than the slow water cushion.
Right.
Over on the side, maybe where the cutty is.
The other argument I've thought of, and I think Sloop and I have talked about it on the banks, but it's like the browns are the more dominant. So it's like they're getting the prime lies, the juicy, slower buckets next to the wood. And I always am like, maybe they push out those rainbows because they literally, the rainbows can't hold their own, and neither can the cutties. It's known that the brown trout are predatory, dominant, and they tend to take the better lies in the river, in my opinion. The juiciest lies tend to be the ones with brown trout, if brown trout are in the system.
That makes me realize I don't think I have ever fished a river, creek, stream where there were just rainbows, just wild rainbows. They've always been mixed in with browns.
Yep.
I fished a handful of them.
Have you?
They lay in different, even when they're alone. I guess they still seem to lie in different. Like it's that fast stuff. I don't know, Matt. Do you notice the rainbows? Like, let's say I fish like a number 4 stonefly or a number 6 stonefly that's bigger. I don't seem to have as much luck on those with rainbows instead of using like something that's maybe between like a 14 and a 12 that's flashy. Like they don't seem to like the bigger flies, at least some of them that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that. I would not where I'm fishing, and that could very well be where you've been. But I find that when stoneflies are on, all species are munching on stonefly nymphs. I can catch big rainbows or rainbows in general. Now, what I would say is, I do get what you're saying to the point of, I'm going to catch more on a lightning bug. For those of you who don't know what a lightning bug is, it's tinsel with, a rib on it. Essentially, it's a rainbow warrior, right? Is what that is. It's flashy, right? You can tie them in gold, pink, weird purple, blue. Those weird godly number 12s tend to get the rainbows more than a brown trout. There's no question about that aspect of it. And why is that? Why do the rainbows like the flashy stuff? Because when you go, you guys wouldn't smoke them on lightning bugs back there, right?
No, and we've tried. We've tried.
Right. So there's something to be said about that flashy pattern for whatever reason.
For me, excellent polarized lenses are a critical piece of gear every day that I'm on the water. Tajima Direct has changed what I see in the river. Tajima Direct offers top-tier lens replacement services with the best polarized lens technology on the market. They offer both prescription and non-prescription lenses, so you can upgrade the lenses in your favorite frames with purpose-built lens tints that are specifically developed for fly fishing. Tajima's patented technology cuts glare and enhances clarity like no other lens that I've worn. I especially love their low-light specific yellow-green 40 polarized lens, which is perfect for early mornings, late evenings, and the cloudy days that we all enjoy so much. Tajima Direct offers excellent service and the best lenses on the market, along with much better pricing than your local eye doctor can offer. Clear vision and more detail with less strain so you can see more fish. That's what Tajima Direct delivers. Visit tajima-direct.com. That's TAJIMA-direct.com. Upgrade your lenses and see what you've been missing. Tactical Fly Fisher was founded by Fly Fishing Team USA angler Devin Olson to bring anglers cutting-edge gear and techniques inspired by the World Fly Fishing Championships. Tactical Fly Fisher's goal is to supply you with the latest and best fly fishing gear and to help you learn how to use it through their videos and books. Whether you need flies, fly tying supplies, a new rod or reel, or any other fly fishing equipment, they've got you covered. Check them out at tacticalflyfisher.com and use the code TB15 to get 15% off one order, excluding rods, reels, waders, and boots. Visit tacticalflyfisher.com. It's funny if you look at the next book that comes out, of a collection of flies, nobody really separates it, into like, oh, these ones are better for rainbow trout. These ones are better for brown trout.
Sure. That's a great point.
Yeah. But
who's
that's
going to
what,
try to
you're
touch
doing.
that on, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to try to unravel that? Because I'm a believer there's no question that's a thing in some of these waterways.
Mm-hmm.
Those rainbows tend to like those flashier patterns.
Brook trout tend to like the flashier, brighter stuff.
Sure.
Like I do a lot better on like the hot spots or flashy stuff.
Even up top, I do.
Yeah.
I do fine enough, I think, with even bigger flies, flashier flies. The Patriot, Charlie McPatriot. That's the only fly you need.
It's awesome.
You can fish
Trevor,
underneath
you
too
look-
as an M.
Yeah, I know. Trevor, you look thoughtful, buddy.
Well, I was just trying to verify whether I'd actually read something or whether I was just making it up. But I was wondering how much the metabolism of rainbows and browns dictates their behavior. And there are a number of studies that compare like boldness and aggressiveness and then swimming speed and general like activity level. And across the board, rainbow trout just operate at a twitchier pace. And so
even if when you catch them, when you're trying to take the hook out or trying to release them, right?
they're just like all
They
over
won't
the
settle
place.
down.
No.
Yeah.
And so I think, like the article that I had read, and this is a few years ago, was just kind of talking about how rainbow trout will sometimes not sit in the most physiologically advantageous spot to sit from an energy conservation standpoint. So they might sit mid-current in a really fast run, but they're going to eat like crazy to maintain a neutral energy balance. Whereas a brown trout is far more likely to sit in softer, like either in somewhere out of the direct mainstream where they can be more selective about what energy they take, but use less energy to stay there. And I think that, what we're even talking about in terms of how we fish for them, relates in some ways to, rainbow trout being maybe more aggressive, maybe more willing to move to a fly, more willing to, and in faster water. So I was just trying to go down a rabbit trail.
I like that.
All that stuff's really beneficial, though. We've talked about it in other podcasts before. Understanding what you're fishing is important, and
for how you're going to approach
big time.
them.
Yeah, and I would say, I think I don't know if we ever answered Mark's question about will the tactics roll over, and maybe we did, but he asked, if you're a good brown trout fisherman, will that automatically translate into Western water or other species that you're targeting, right?
Yeah.
And I would say, look, yeah, it does. Like, our core skill set is going to absolutely translate. But if you're going to be stubborn and not at least acknowledge that there's other species in the river, you're probably going to be at a disadvantage. And I learned that being out here. It took me a little while to understand, why aren't I catching these cutties? Well, that's because I wasn't fishing necessarily the right water type or the right fly. And now all of a sudden it was enlightening to be, it was just as enlightening as when I would learn a little bit better tightline technique back in central PA and I got rewarded with more fish. Well, the same applied to different species out here and different techniques I would or just learn and approach things different. It's important to understand what species you're fishing for when you're out there pursuing trout. There's no question that's important.
I guess, is it, the ability to identify where those fish are lying, is that river knowledge or is that a tactic?
I think it's a combination of both. Like,
It's river smithing.
yeah,
That's what it is.
It's
Dr. Smith.
you gotta.
it's woodsmanship.
You're going back
to
like
that
2 or 3
concept.
seasons.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, though, I think it's a combination of them, Bill. I think it's like it's the knowledge of the prey, or of their physiology and behavior. It's the knowledge of the river and currents, and the ability to target them with tactics that work. So I think it's like it's like somehow that dynamic combination of all of those things.
Well, we see it all the time when you guys go to introduce one of your friends to fishing. Like they want to get into it, or they used to do it as a kid and they want to tag along, and all of a sudden you're playing guide. So much of the stuff that comes natural to us, you don't even think twice about it.
Mm-hmm.
For example, we said that the rainbows that we have around here are stocked. And so if I'm going into one of our rivers and I know that it's just kind of one of those places where you're probably going to run into stocked rainbows. I'm like, here, swing that fly a little bit. Let that drift go. Let it come out of the dead drift and let it rise, whatever. Let it cross, a little cross lead, little jig or pop it, do something. And you're probably going to catch a rainbow, and there you go. Anyway, it's a lot of that it just becomes intuitive. It makes sense to us, but you've seen it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
What about the size of all these fish?
Well, what's the biggest, right? I mean, which one grows the biggest? That should actually be like scientific, right? There's a fact there. It's not an opinion.
No,
Well, I think the brown trout lives the longest, right?
Yeah.
Or potentially could.
no question. I mean, it's
Again, we're talking wild fish, right?
look, yeah, and I think there's a reason why there's the coast to coast intrigue holding a big brown trout, right? Because it's the pinnacle of big fish. I mean, you can absolutely catch big cutties and big rainbows, but from a frequency standpoint, it's all about the brown trout, right? It's why it generates so much controversy in the fall, right? And then there's something about that fish, man, that gets big and beastly, and the look of it, and it's captured a lot of anglers' intrigue, right? Because those other fish, I would say I'll speak on behalf of the cuts. I've spent the last 4 or 5 years really chasing cutthroat. Now we are very fortunate out here to where a 20-inch cutthroat isn't impossible, which is pretty nice when you're chasing native fish, right? To be in the 16 to 20-inch range on certain areas is it's pretty cool, right? But
seriously,
you're not going to really, to get into the 22s and the 24s would be wow, right? I mean, that would be a pretty substantial situation likely lake influenced, I would guess, but maybe not. There's regions in the Yellowstone region that maybe have 2 foot, cuts, but not 30-inch cuts, right? Brown trout get to 30 inches or 27 inches or 26 inches.
Yeah.
You see pictures of that. So that's pretty badass when it comes to the brown trout to have that over all the other species.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think the brook trout in, Canada area get a lot bigger
Well, then here,
than here.
but
and
not
so
in the brown trout up there, right? If they have them.
no. I guess where I'm leading here is rainbow trout. A wild river rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's really rare to get them over 20 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt, I don't know if is that fair out your way? Like, do you get a lot of, how many in a year do you catch that are over 20?
Not a ton, especially when you're talking direct
We've seen some pictures,
river
though.
fish.
I've seen a couple.
Yeah,
From-
no, I mean,
from you.
some
Massive.
of my home rivers has one, but to Deli's point, some tailwaters maybe.
Yeah.
But when there's a tailwater with the browns and the rainbows, the bigger fish, but almost always is going to be the brown trout.
Mm-hmm.
Into that 22-inch, 21-inch class.
And back to Trevor's big word explanation of how
Dr. Big Words.
rainbows, hold, and they do not use their energy or conserve their energy well. So that would probably be why they can't grow as big.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Good point.
Yeah, that's fair.
But brook trout are probably the least, like at least in PA by far. Like, I mean, 12-inch brook trout is, a 2 or 3 year fish if you're fishing, small mountain streams.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Josh, are we running over top of you, buddy?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Well, I mean, Trevor and I were talking about how, I feel like I have very little to add to this. I fish for brown trout, almost 100% of the time. And we don't have wild rainbows around here.
Mm-mm.
And I very rarely get out to fish for brook trout. And, I enjoy it when I do, but if I were to say, what season I'm in I do care more about a bigger fish right now. And that's why over the past few years I've been so into night fishing. It's why, it matters more to me right now than numbers, than even the wild places, yeah,
okay, yeah.
And so I'm quiet. I don't feel like I've got a whole lot to add to this. I don't get to fish for cutthroat. I don't fish for wild rainbows, and I'm not doing a lot of fishing for brook trout. It's kind of all about the browns for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
Would you think different if the brookies were a little bigger? Because let's face, I mean, most of the
I probably
native brookies
would.
are,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
would
mean,
too.
like the biggest that I've caught is maybe 13 inches,
yeah.
ever,
Yeah.
around here. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's tough, right? I mean, I think some people have that as a block, preventing them from chasing the brookies in the sense of the size. And then the conditions. Let's face it, it's usually not all, but tight quarters. You got to have a certain patience level to generate the success rate on those brook trout streams.
Right.
oh yeah, and then it's time. I mean,
Yeah.
it takes more time to get out there for me,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not something I'm doing very often.
So what about this? What's the best streamer eater?
I'm out.
Oh, yeah. Croak doesn't know anything about streamers.
Brown trout with brook trout being second, and then rainbow, like a real wild rainbow.
Yeah.
A wild rainbow and a cutthroat are probably fighting really hard for last right there. But I don't know.
What about, so we kind of talked about the best dry fly eater. You guys don't think it'd be the brown trout. They're probably the most selective, but not the most, let's say, eager to eat dries. Is that fair?
Yeah.
More like rainbows. So which one's the best dry fly eater?
Probably brookie or cutty.
Cutties. Yeah.
I don't know, Matt.
Yeah,
Matt, you fish for both.
It's so circumstantial, but like when it's on,
It is. That's
right.
fair, it
Like
is.
when it's
Yeah.
on, I would say that it's tough to beat the cutthroat, but I don't know, man. I can say the brown trout, man. I vision all these boiling rivers in central PA with brown trout eating dry flies, and
again,
it's like, dang.
That's when almost any trout just has to
I
eat
get
up
it.
top,
I get
right?
it. But it's like that's the prime time where they're eating dries, and it can be pretty spectacular to watch. To watch that,
and we've said a couple times that's what people like about it is the selectivity of it too. You know, you could have 5 different bugs, and now you got to figure out which one they're eating and what phase of that bug. That's a fun game.
Yeah, and I think, look, I mean, to layer it, not to go down a rabbit hole, but like the environment that those trout live in probably affects the willingness of the dry fly eat to a degree too that we can't ignore completely, right? I'm sure a lot of it's species, but often, you know, how does the food forms presented to those fish in the different waterways can contribute to the, you know, how much they're eating on the surface? Are we knocking the brown for not eating on top, or is it just they're smart and they eat the smorgasbord of nymphs that are flying around underneath the surface, right? I don't mean, I would say from my experience, I'd go cutty, brown, rainbow, brook trout, knowing that brook trout are pretty opportunistic, but like I'm thinking bigger rivers, like action wise.
Yeah.
I've had some pretty good action on big salmon flies with brown trout in particular.
The landscape is changing for trout anglers. No doubt you've already noticed another truck at your favorite access point and seen more anglers on the water. For those looking for new challenges and fishing opportunities, Trout Routes has the data to help you avoid the crowds and explore new public water. Trout Routes has mapped more than 50,000 trout streams across the country with curated, detailed maps of public land and access points. Trout Routes has developed integrated and interactive data, putting the tools in your hands to research new water and help you navigate in the wild to know exactly where you stand in the current. It's still up to you to find those deep pools and undercuts, but Trout Routes helps you get on the water, connecting you with resources like fly shops and stream gauges for trout water across the country. Download Trout Routes in the App Store today. Then use the code Troutbitten for 20% off your membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer. Do we think the Browns are the most cautious then?
Man,
I think that they give that impression. And I'll take it back to maybe it is just because they're more of a conservationist from an energy standpoint. And so they're less willing to make big moves for prey unless it's really worth it. And I think we see that sometimes with larger browns for a larger prey item might make more of a move, you know, because they think it's worth it. But I think that maybe they're more cautious, and maybe they're also just more content to eat things that are closer to them, and so they have a smaller radius. And that does make them harder to catch for sure.
Yep.
I think it's pressure related for the most part, whether how eager a fish is to move, how many times they've been fooled. I don't know. Like, there's a little bit of the species that may play into it, but I don't know. I feel like that, like the ease at which you can catch a fish, I think, is more related to the human factor of how many times they've seen flies.
That's interesting. I find that that selectivity, you know, we talked about streamers and how the Browns like to chase streamers. I think there's an aspect that I see out here with like big salmon flies, where the brown trout, man, they're some of the most memorable eats. It almost is like they're exploding on a streamer that's just sitting on the surface, and they go out of their way to hammer that. But all the memorable eats, and obviously rainbows eat salmon flies. The brown sticks to in your head, right? The ones that are just destroying. So it's how they eat. Like we've talked about, you know, all this stuff and these species, and they definitely, in my opinion, they eat different a little bit.
Yeah.
And the brown trout that leaves that lasting impression because of how aggressive it at times it eats certain food objects, right? Like,
Yeah, it might
would
be
you
cautious.
agree with that?
Yeah, it might be cautious, but when it decides to eat, a lot of times it's eating hard.
It's like it can eat hard.
That's why they're good night feeders too, you know. And that is an aggressive bite sometimes.
Yeah.
When they decide to abandon that caution, they're like, I'm going to get it.
And I think to get to that point, it's absolutely hard. But when they commit, man, they're like they're tough.
I told you guys I had 5 good almost eats, I guess, on the streamer today. Upper teens fish, brown trout. I didn't convert on any of them. I caught smaller.
You slooped them.
Browns. I guess I did. I don't know what I could have done differently. I'm sure there's something. I don't know, but every one of them, I saw I had good light angles, and I was fishing under 2 feet of water the whole time, and I could see every one of them. And I don't know, but anyway, it was exciting. Is my point. Is that they were, I'm chasing for 3, 4, 5 feet. They come off of the log. It was always structure, or the lip of even like a tail out a couple times. I don't, but it was exciting. And it was, they almost come slow at first. It all happens so fast. So within like 2 seconds or a second and a half, it's like slow, boom. They accelerate like I'm gonna go get this. Now I am. I'm going to get it. And that last swirl.
Yeah.
I don't know. Love it.
It's interesting.
It is interesting, and it makes you want to do a whole other episode, like we said on, how much are the brown trout species. When you take all the variables out and you just, put them in a stream that's not pressured, how do those fish react? And I've fished for some unpressured browns before where they seem like they're pretty darn willing, right? Fish to, so how much does pressure play a role in these weary browns? I mean, it definitely could condition them in certain areas to be a little different. It's good to acknowledge that, right? Every area of the country could maybe be a little different based on how much pressure you're receiving.
Yeah, there's not much pure out there.
Yeah.
We talked about that a little bit on the pressured trout podcast we did.
Yeah.
And I thought it was pretty interesting to see how big of a difference it did make in trout's behavior for, successive fishing kind of led to longer refractive periods. Like the trout took longer to recover after they were fished over again and again. And I think we fish many streams here that don't have a full recovery for most of the year.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And it's different like when we get stretches of inclement weather where there aren't as many anglers on the water and stuff like that. But gosh, those fish probably, it's hard to see many of our waterways without a week going by without pressure.
Hey, anything else, guys?
So if you guys had one day to chase one species of fish anywhere in the country, where would it be, and what would you be chasing?
I would love to go up to Labrador and chase big brook trout. I do. I think that
would be
just
your
like
thing.
the combination of the landscape up there is just kind of so different and beautiful, remote. You have to kind of get flown into some of those places, but then you can fish brook trout in big waterways and catch them at a size that I think would be pretty awesome.
So I've said before, I'm not much of a species chaser. I don't care that much, but bull trout, and we didn't talk about bull trout or steelhead like I thought we might. Maybe that's another episode. Never caught a bull trout. I would like to. I know some places out there, Matt, you're not allowed to target them, so I guess I can't go there. But, that's my answer. Somewhere for bull trout, and I want to fish streamers. A lot.
Yeah.
I'll go with Trevor to Labrador to catch the monster brook trout.
Yeah. Let's
Chase
go.
has
Bill.
done that. Chase Howard's done that a good bit.
Does he?
Hasn't he?
Yeah, he has.
Yeah. You got something, Charlie?
I'm not exactly sure where it would be, but I would love to visit somewhere else that has predictable big brown at night. It's just that's just where
Keeps
I'm at.
coming
right
back
now.
to it. Yeah,
I'd like
love
to
it.
do it. I'd like to do more of it somewhere else.
You don't have
I'd
to do
like to
far.
take these take what I'm doing here and try to make it work somewhere else with even bigger ones.
He's hooked on the butter.
Yeah.
That would be That would be cool.
All right,
Yeah.
who's got the readout? Anybody? Volunteer.
I've not read something in a while. I can do it.
Here we go. Jarling's got the readout. There he is.
Remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Troutbitten website hosts over 1,500 articles, videos, and podcasts with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, now featuring the Troutbitten Tip series, the Troutbitten Fly Box, and Fly Fishing the Monorig, all in collaboration with Wilds Media. You'll also find the Fish and Film videos and the new Riverside series, all in their own playlists on the Troutbitten YouTube. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a comment, because that really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what about Matt? You probably fish for wild rainbows the most out of all of us.
Sloop does. Let's be honest. But
Yeah.
No, yeah.
I love it.
Sorry. Hey, Sloop. I know Sloop's been listening a lot, so that's why I said that.
That's good.
Sloop loves the rainbows.
He is. Yeah.